So let's talk about a market that is, at the exact same time, both a pioneer and a target. Minnesota's cannabis industry in 2026. It's just a fascinating story of state-level innovation clashing head-on with federal power. And it's creating this high-stakes drama with billion-dollar consequences. Let's break it all down. And this, right here, is the heart of the story. On one hand, you've got this booming, incredibly innovative market. But on the other, there's a federal deadline looming that could literally wipe out one of its most successful and unique sectors. Talk about promise versus peril, right? And just a quick note before we dive deep, this explainer is brought to you by marijuana.school. They're a really great resource if you're looking to learn more about the ins and outs of the industry. All right, so the initial gold rush fever of legalization, that's pretty much over. 2026 is all about professionalization. We're seeing a big shift away from that sort of Wild West environment to what some people are even calling a pharma-grade market. The key moment here was something called the hard transition. And you can't overstate this. This was way more than just some new paperwork. It meant every single hemp business had to get fully licensed by the state's new Office of Cannabis Management, the OCM, and meet these super rigorous new standards. It basically unified the entire industry under one very powerful state agency. This timeline really shows you how the whole year is playing out. So you've got that March 31st deadline, and then right after, things start moving again. Then bam, April 22nd, a huge game-changing financial win for medical cannabis. But look at that last date, November 13th. That's the federal deadline that's casting this huge shadow over everything else. Okay, first, let's get into the good news. And trust me, it is big news for the industry this year. For anyone in the medical space, the entire financial landscape just did a complete 180. That's the estimated national tax savings for the cannabis industry in 2025 alone. I mean, to put that in perspective, that is billions of dollars flowing back into these businesses. And it's all thanks to one single change in federal policy. This isn't some small adjustment. It's a seismic event for the industry's bottom line. Now, to really get why this is such a huge deal, you gotta understand the old problem. Because cannabis was a Schedule I drug, these businesses were legally considered traffickers. Think about this. Imagine a restaurant paying taxes on its full revenue without being able to deduct the cost of rent or ingredients or even paying its staff. That was the absurd reality for cannabis companies under Tax Code 280E. I mean, look at this. It is literally night and day. Moving medical cannabis down to Schedule III means these businesses can finally operate like any other legitimate company. They can deduct normal expenses and pay standard corporate taxes instead of a crippling 70% or even more. This one change basically unlocks the entire financial system for them. Without 280A hanging over their heads, banks see way less risk. And that means these businesses can finally get normal loans for things like new equipment or expansion instead of having to go to predatory lenders or give up huge chunks of their company. All right, now for the other side of the coin. Because while the medical operators got this massive lifeline, Minnesota's incredibly successful hemp industry is now staring right down the barrel of a federal gun. And this is the question on literally everyone's mind. The state pioneered this massive, one-of-a-kind market for THC-infused beverages. A lot of them come from Minnesota's beloved local craft breweries. And now, a new federal law threatens to make almost all of it illegal overnight. And here's why. Minnesota's state law allows for a pretty potent 10 milligrams of THC per drink. While the new federal definition of hemp, which takes effect in November, caps it at just 0.4 milligrams per container. That means the state limit is 25 times higher than what the feds are about to allow. So this creates some very clear battle lines. You have manufacturers and farmers facing absolute devastation. You've got big retailers just watching the clock, ready to pull products off the shelves. And the state regulators? Well, they're in a totally impossible position, right? They're supposed to enforce state laws that are about to get bulldozed by a federal tidal wave. So, while this huge federal battle is raging, Minnesota cities are not just sitting around waiting. Nope. They are actively shaping what cannabis on Main Street actually looks and feels like. And as you're about to see, the approaches are incredibly different from town to town. You can just see the diversity right here. St. Paul created this special downtown-friendly zone. Lakeville capped its stores at 6. But Anoka?
Anoka did something nobody else has. They opened the nation's first government-run cannabis dispensary. And get this, they're using the profits to fund parks and lower property taxes. That could be a model for public funding all across the country.
So what are people actually buying? Well, traditional flower, no surprise, still holds the top spot. But the real story here is the big shift toward convenience. Vapes and edibles now make up over a third of all sales. It just shows a clear demand for more modern, more accessible products. And speaking of mainstream, this number is a huge milestone. 72. That's how many licenses the Minnesota-based retail giant Target now holds to sell what the state calls lower potency, hemp-derived edibles and drinks. I mean, when a retailer like Target gets in the game, it doesn't just expand the market, it normalizes it for a whole new wave of consumers. So let's bring this all together. You have this newly professionalized industry, you have a massive tax break for the medical companies, but you also have a potential death sentence for the state's signature hemp beverage market. This really is, in every sense of the word, a market at a crossroads. So how does a business actually survive all this? Well, the winning strategy for 2026 seems to have three main parts. First, you pivot to medical to get away from those old tax burdens. Second, you diversify with federally compliant products to build a firewall against that hemp cliff. And third, you have to invest heavily in technology to drive efficiency, because the whole market is only going to get more competitive. And in the end, it really all boils down to this one question. Minnesota built one of the country's most thoughtful, equitable, and innovative cannabis markets from the ground up. But now, its entire future depends on whether that homegrown ingenuity can actually survive a direct clash with Washington, D.C.